I was an officer for our local police department, and my shifts were always changing. One night, I was working from 10 p.m. to 10 a.m. at the office when a dispatcher notified me of a call about a group of teenagers trespassing on private property, specifically a hospital on the outskirts of town that had been abandoned for the last decade. This was a common place for groups to hang out and do various illegal activities, and the whole department knew about it. It was my fourth time going there, and I was sure it would be a quick and typical case of walking in and either escorting a group of friends out or watching them run off. I was tired, so either was good enough for me, but I honestly didn't care too much to arrest and charge them. I just needed them to leave the property. When I arrived at the hospital, I quickly realized that something was off. A flashlight was shining through the windows of the second story, moving really fast across multiple windows like someone was running through the hallway. I got out of my vehicle and prepped my flashlight before entering the building. I called out, requesting everyone to show themselves, but of course no one did. I listened at the entrance for any noises to hopefully give me an idea of where to look, but it was dead silent. Enough so to wake me up and get my nerves going, having me keep my right hand on the holster of my gun. It was always a slight fear that it could be a trap to lead in an officer and attempt something, but I kept my cool and walked through the old hallway and up the flight of stairs. As I reached the top of the stairs, a thud echoed through the building, sounding like someone hitting a wall. It was definitely from the second floor. I entered the hallway and shone my flashlight all the way down, not seeing anyone or even a sign of anyone. I called out again very aggressively, knowing that the stairs I was by were the only way up and down from the second story. I stayed there and listened again, but heard nothing more than the creaking of the building. I walked slowly through the hallway, looking through each door and scanning the rooms with my flashlight, but there was nothing more than old hospital beds and graffiti. When I got to the last room, the door was closed, so I called out one more time before swinging it open. I cleared the room, but nobody was inside. However, there were signs of recent activity, being cigarettes on the ground with smoke still rising from them. This was extremely concerning, knowing that they hadn't left the second floor through the stairs, and the only other way was if they had jumped out of a broken window before I could even check the door behind me. Slammed shut, followed by something smashing against it and footsteps departing down the hallway. Luckily, I was able to forcefully push the door open enough to slide through the opening, seeing that a large hospital bed was pressed against it. By the time I got out, whoever was there was long gone. Backup came, and we did a more thorough investigation, also checking in with the one who originally called in the two teenagers. What was odd about this was that there was only one clear set of footsteps I heard, and only one flashlight in the window. The cigarettes still burning also showed that they had left in a hurry, which could have been from me arriving, but then why would one of them stay behind in the morning? We got reports from a mother on her missing teenage son, followed soon after by an identical report by another mother on her teenage son. After looking into it for days and then weeks and then months, it was almost definite that they weren't going to show up, and now 6 years later, they still haven't. Their disappearance is an unlikely one, and that's what makes it so difficult. It isn't certain whether or not the person in the hospital with me was one of the two kids, but the current most stable theory is that it was someone else, and unless something more comes up, it's not likely that we will ever know. As a security guard for a small warehouse in the city, I used to work an overnight shift that wasn't ideal, but it paid well compared to others. The company that owned the building sold expensive tech items, so it was necessary to have the building under surveillance 24/7. My job consisted of watching cameras, walking around and filling out reports. On this particular night, it was raining heavily with occasional thunder, creating a creepy ambience that made me feel more laid back knowing that nobody would be going out. I got in at 10:30 p.m. and talked to the closing shift workers as they left. Having the warehouse to myself until 6:00 a.m., the building was usually quiet with only occasional creaking. But with the rain crackling down on the roof, It was almost impossible to hear anything else. About 2 hours in, I took a break from staring at camera footage and got up to walk around the building for a typical security check. I went all the way down to the far end where most of the storage section of the warehouse was and started walking towards the other end when a soft beeping sound echoed through the hallway. It was an alert coming from the security room, and I quickly checked it to see that it was a latch sensor on the back door, which meant someone tried to open it. I opened up the live camera feed covering that door, but didn't see anyone after checking it for a minute. I went to the back door myself to take a look, thinking maybe the sensor was faulty or that the rain had messed with something. I disabled the alarm and opened the door, glancing around to see nothing but an empty alleyway behind the warehouse. The door itself looked fine, though I wasn't an expert on it. I ran it through a test, and it never misfired or failed to detect the latch. Afterward, I walked cautiously across the building looking for any fallen boxes or noticeable damage, but didn't find anything as I got closer to the front of the building. The sound of the rain started to get louder, and I rounded the corner to see that the front door was wide open, with water puddles reflecting on the floor. I sprinted back and locked myself inside the room, pressing the emergency button to get hold of the police immediately while I waited. I heard a few thuds from within the building but didn't see anything as I listened intently. The police arrived a few minutes later, and 2 officers searched the warehouse while one remained at the front. A minute later, they came back with a man in cuffs, who was hiding behind some boxes in the storage area with a hammer in his hands. As he passed by me, he gave me a cold stare that horrified me. The police reported back that the guy seemed to have been under the influence of several drugs and gave no reason for his actions. Luckily, he's still behind bars, and I no longer work overnight at a creepy warehouse, but that night still holds a horrifying feeling over me, especially on rainy nights when I can't see or hear my surroundings. This incident occurred on a road trip I took while returning from visiting my family during the holiday season. Typically, I prefer flying and avoid driving for extended periods, but this year, exorbitant ticket prices compelled me to embark on a long drive spanning a few states. Despite meticulous planning to arrive home a few days before work resumed, an unexpected snowstorm led me to extend my stay by an additional 2 days before commencing the journey. The roads, devoid of post-holiday traffic, meandered through less populated areas, posing the primary challenge of combating sleepiness and monotony. The initial 8 hours passed without incident, albeit my weariness. The snow-covered road served as a visual stimulant, keeping me alert. Around 10 p.m., with a hotel reservation in a small town just 2 hours away, a dim light appeared in my rearview mirror. It turned out to be headlights from a vehicle approaching rapidly, the first fellow traveler encountered in over an hour. The lights grew larger, revealing a fast-approaching large van. With the road limited to a single lane, I couldn't yield, anticipating they would overtake me due to their considerable speed. Surprisingly, upon reaching my car, the van matched my speed and trailed behind for almost 10 minutes. The eerie sensation intensified as the van stuck close, obscuring its front bumper and license plate in my mirror. Concerned, I took note of an upcoming gas station exit, hoping to shake off the pursuer. To my dismay, the van continued to tail me as I exited and pulled into the gas station. Uncertainty loomed as I parked at a pump, the van ominously settling in behind me. Surveying the dimly lit gas station, I noticed a portion with lights off and a closed sign on the door. The surroundings were shrouded in darkness, devoid of houses or buildings, only a snow-covered field with a solitary road. Glancing in my mirror, I spotted a man outside the van, refueling. A feeling, whether instinct or intuition, prompted me to be cautious. As I pumped gas, the man swiftly completed refueling and proceeded to the back of the van. The unsettling sound of the back door being lifted open prompted me to act swiftly. Retrieving the pump, I sensed impending danger. 3 men suddenly sprinted towards me from around the van. As I hastily got into my car, locking the doors, one attempted to force open the door as I shivered in fear. I quickly started the car, and the trio circled around, attempting each door before abruptly retreating to their van. Driving away, I witnessed their departure in the opposite direction. Despite reporting the incident to the police, I received no updates. It became evident that their intention was to carry out abductions under the cover of night on the desolate highway. The unsettling aspect was their confidence and professionalism, as if they were seasoned in such activities. Reflecting on the incident, I emphasize the importance of vigilance and encourage others to learn from my experience, as the outcome might not be as fortunate for everyone. It was a snowy night when I pulled into the parking lot of my gas station, where I worked the overnight shift from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. Although I didn't like this job, I had been there for several months and struggling to find somewhere else to work. Night shifts were the best for my personal schedule, but it was tough to get through every shift. I parked in front of the building beside the only other car in the parking lot, which belonged to my coworker. He left a few minutes later, and it was just me for the rest of the night. My manager had a paper on the desk with some tasks to complete, but it wasn't much, and I estimated it would take no more than an hour to finish them all. However, I tried to put it off as long as possible to save myself from falling asleep. At around 12 a.m., a car pulled into the station. I glanced out the window and saw an old SUV parked by one of the pumps. Most people wouldn't be driving around in this weather, so getting a customer every once in a while was normal. I went back to my phone and scrolled through some videos for probably 10 minutes until I looked back outside and saw the SUV was still there. The headlights were off, and the doors were closed, looking like they should be pumping gas, but had been for an extended period. I stood up and got closer to the window, looking down both sides of the building, but didn't see anyone outside. If they had been in their car for more than a few minutes, they would have to be freezing, as it was snowy, windy, and cold. I got nervous for them, so I paid more attention for the next few minutes, waiting to see any movement through the dark windows or someone getting back inside their car. However, there was nothing. It was like the car was just abandoned right next to the pump. After some thought, I put on my jacket and went outside immediately. I knew I was right. It was too cold for anyone to be in there with the car off, or for anyone to even be outside for more than a few minutes. I rushed over to the car and looked around but didn't see anyone inside. I called out, "Hello, is anyone in there?" But from what I could see, there wasn't anyone. I was more confused, so I backed up and looked around the empty gas station parking lot before starting to walk back. Now, with my eyes not focused on the car, I noticed shoe prints in the snow going toward the building, not directly in front of it. I looked back, and they seemed to come from the car, but at this point, I was freezing and didn't want to investigate further without warming up first. Inside, I turned on the small heater next to the counter and put my hands in front of it to warm them up. However, I only stayed inside for 30 seconds to a minute before a thump resonated through the building from behind me. I spun around but didn't see anything, then walked toward the back on the floor, where there were puddles of dirty water like snow that had melted off someone's boots. Feeling a chill run through me, I stepped closer to the back room and turned the corner toward where the supply room was standing in the dark, behind one of the shelves. I could see the outline of a figure. They were tall with broad shoulders and had a large scruffy beard, and they were looking right at me. My heart stopped for a moment. But after the initial shock, my reaction was to just walk back to the counter. I don't know why, maybe I was just too shocked to react appropriately after staring at the doorway to the supply room for what felt like an eternity. I quietly picked up the store phone and called the police, whispering for help. Then I endured the most unnerving 10 minutes of my life. As I waited during this time, I didn't hear or see anything from the supply room, which honestly added to my fear for some reason. The man never came out to confront me when 2 cops finally pulled in and came inside. I quietly told them where the man was. They searched the room while I stayed by the front, but I was shocked when they came out with nobody else. But the man was gone. Watery shoe prints surrounded the back door, but outside were fresh tracks in the snow going straight away from the gas station, straight into the completely dark, empty field that led on for miles. Obviously, nobody could search that at night, but even when they did in the following days, they didn't find anything. I mean, the field was huge. He could have gone anywhere, but it was so cold and windy that night that I was almost sure they would find a body. I was driving home from a late-night pizza delivery, sometime around 2 a.m. The road I was on was an unfrequented side street that conveniently connected two parts of town without any intersections or stoplights. As I drove along, something felt off with my car, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I checked my gas and didn't see any other warning signs on my dashboard, so I assumed it was nothing to worry about. However, as I continued down the road, my car began to struggle, shifting unevenly and slowing down. Eventually, it just stopped accelerating altogether. I turned off the engine and got out of the car to investigate, but there didn't appear to be any damage on the outside. As I stood there in the darkness, I saw a figure standing far away on the other side of the road through the fog. I called one of my coworkers for help, and he agreed to come pick me up after 30 minutes. While I waited, I checked my mirrors but didn't see anyone around. The eerie feeling grew as time passed, and I could only make out a few feet into the forest before it was complete darkness. I heard footsteps getting closer, but I couldn't see anything. Suddenly, a man appeared near one of the trees and walked directly up to my car, knocking on the window with a friendly smile. I apologized that I couldn't roll down the window, and he simply stood there before trying to open the door. As I looked in the mirror, he was standing by the trunk, seemingly hiding something. Suddenly, headlights appeared through the fog from down the road, and the man watched as my car slowed down and started to pull in behind me. He then ran into the forest, and my friend noticed him too. We left my car behind and called the police, who arrived with a tow truck to pick it up. It turned out that the gas meter was stuck in the middle of the tank, and it was actually an empty tank. However, there was nothing on the man, leading me to wonder what he was trying to do. My friend told me that he had been holding a gun before he ran into the forest. I'm still unsure of what happened that night, but I'm grateful that my friend showed up when he did, or I might never have been seen again. I started working as a delivery driver for Pizza Hut when I turned 16. It was only a part-time job that I did after school a couple of days a week, since I didn't want to have a job that I was constantly stressed out about. At first, it was a very boring and repetitive job that left most days feeling forgettable. However, one experience stands out to me as something I will never forget. It was a Friday, and we got an order in just before closing time. The address wasn't too far from the restaurant, but it went through a part of town that I rarely went to. This neighborhood was different from the rest, not having many houses or stores in it. It gave me no reason to ever go there. While driving through, I kept checking the GPS as it took me all the way through the neighborhood, turning down seemingly every road until it finally said I arrived. Something was off on my left, a row of maybe 6 or 7 houses. On the right was a path leading to a park. The waypoint on the GPS was showing up on the right side, so I double-checked by searching the address on Google, and it was the actual address of the park. I parked on the side of the road and picked up the pizza, getting out and walking up to the path with a better look. I could see that it was just a walking path, not leading to any sort of playground or anything, which is where I expected to see a group of kids who had ordered a pizza. Instead, there was a guy sitting on a bench a little ways down, waving at me. I started walking over, still a bit unsure about it, as I got closer. He stood up and started searching through his wallet for cash. The fact that he was alone on a walking path at night and for some reason needed a pizza delivered here was odd to say the least. So I was skeptical when I went up and greeted him. We began exchanging small talk, but during the interaction, the guy started talking to himself, repeating the same phrases like, "I'm okay," and "everything's going to be okay." This made me feel like I needed to ask him if he was okay. He stopped talking and looked up at me in his eyes, and I saw fear and helplessness, something that I don't think I'd ever truly seen in someone's look before. From his look alone, a surge of adrenaline rushed through me, and I turned around to see a tall man wearing a cloth mask over his face. He held me at knife point and screamed at me to empty my pockets and toss everything on the ground. I quickly did as he said and only became more terrified when he started to forcefully push both me and the guy from the bench off the path and into the woods, leaving everything on the ground and showing no interest in any of it. We walked for a few minutes, going well into the woods, far enough to no longer see the light of the path. Then the man next to me suddenly shoved me to the ground and started to run in the other direction. The masked man surprisingly left me alone and took off after him. I quickly got back up and ran back to the path, hearing and seeing nothing else. Police arrived only a few minutes after I called, but both men were gone, and from what I know, they still are. I can't say why the other victim pushed me down, though it was most likely an effort to leave me behind so he could escape. I don't blame him, but it was a low move, and it makes me feel slightly less sorry for him, and whatever he had to endure afterward. What the abductor intended to do is unknown, but him showing no interest in my wallet or belongings makes me feel it was something extremely awful. Ironically, though, it was the selfishness of the other victim that both put me in that awful situation and saved me from it. As a delivery driver in my late 20s, I never expected to find myself in such an unusual situation. It was during the time of mandatory lockdowns due to the pandemic, and I had just received a call for 4 large pizzas to be delivered to a location outside of town. The address given to me seemed normal enough, a house located about 30 minutes away from the shop. However, upon arriving at the address, I was immediately confused. There was a large open gate leading up to a driveway, but at the end of it, there was nothing but a dead end surrounded by forest. It was as if the house didn't exist. As I stood outside my car, I could hear the sound of a bonfire coming from deep within the woods. A figure emerged from the darkness and waved me over, inviting me to bring the pizzas. Despite the unusual nature of the situation, I decided to proceed with the delivery, reasoning that it was just a group of college kids having a party. I got out of my car and walked towards the bonfire, where I found half a dozen people huddled around the flames. They didn't seem particularly happy to see me, and there were no signs of beer bottles or drinks anywhere nearby. It was as if they had set up camp in the middle of nowhere, just for the sake of having a bonfire. I held up the pizzas awkwardly, hoping someone would take them and pay for them. However, no one seemed interested in doing either. Instead, they just stood there, staring at me. The eerie feeling of being surrounded by these strangers grew stronger with each passing second. I tried to ask for payment, but before I could even get the words out, a man walked over and took the pizzas from me. He handed them off to someone else, and I quickly turned around and started walking back to my car. As I looked back, I saw more people emerging from the forest, their faces obscured by the darkness. My heart raced as they approached the bonfire, their movements strange and unsettling. I didn't even bother to check if anything was missing from my car before speeding away as fast as I could. It wasn't until I was back at the shop that I realized how suspicious the whole situation was. I told my manager what had happened, and he understood, but even he couldn't explain why these people would order pizzas and then just disappear into thin air. In the end, I called the police to investigate the group's strange behavior. When they arrived, there was no sign of them anywhere, except for the still burning bonfire. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. The mystery of that night remains unsolved, and it's likely that it will forever be a part of my delivery driver career that I'd rather forget. I worked at a small local retail store in my 20s as an overnight lead. It wasn't one of those big chain grocery stores, with only about 8 or 9 locations. Most nights, I had an overnight stalker to help out, but it wasn't uncommon for me to spend the whole shift alone. Not that it was a very intense working environment, as I often found myself working slow just so I wouldn't run out of things to do. This was one of those nights where I was alone and working at a steady pace. At the beginning of my shift, I loaded up some boxes and moved into the aisles to start stalking. It doesn't take much mental effort, so my mind was elsewhere, just thinking about random things. I went through about 3 aisles until a knock at the front entrance made me jump. I almost didn't even realize what it was because I was so spaced out, but once I did, I got really confused. I heard them knock again, louder enough to echo through the store. I walked down to the end of the aisle and looked through the large front windows, seeing a man in a hood standing at the doors. I went up to the other side of the entrance, where we were closed. Won't be open until 8:00 a.m. The man looked at me but didn't say anything. I pointed at the sign on the door, saying sorry. The man continued to look at me for a few seconds before turning and walking away. I watched him walk until I couldn't see him anymore, but it didn't look like he had parked anywhere. The whole thing was odd to say the least, but I figured he was just at the wrong place or something. I went back to what I was doing, stocking up the shelves, and eventually forgetting about the man. By 2 a.m., I had gotten through half of the aisles and was ready to take my lunch break. I left the boxes where they were and went to the break room on the other end of the building. I was in there for probably a good half hour before tossing the rest of my lunch and going back to work. As I walked through the store, I noticed a man walking past the other end. He looked like he was just walking across the store, not having noticed me. I froze in place, feeling an instant rush of fear, now listening intently. I could hear the man's footsteps move toward the side of the building I'd just come from, so I moved into the aisle and hid behind the shelves. The footsteps sounded like they went toward the break room, but just before I left the aisle to try and run and get help, I heard the man rushing out of the room. The footsteps were now sprinting through the store, getting closer and closer. I ran for the other end of the aisle, looking back and seeing the man turn in and start running at me. I ran for the front door, getting my keys out and trying to unlock it with shaky hands. The man appeared at the end of the aisle just as I got it open, and just as I stepped out of the building, I saw a bright flash in the corner of my eye and heard a pop sound that made my ears ring. So loud was the gunshot that I didn't even know where it landed, but I sprinted for my life around the building. I made it to my car and hid in the back seat as I called 911 from what I knew. The man didn't follow me outside. He was gone by the time police made it to the store, but they found the back door to be busted open along with some heavy tools sitting next to it. The most terrifying of their findings was the hole created by the gunshots sitting right to the side of the front doors. Why the man broke in and was so aggressive targeting me like that is unknown from his behavior, but the police seemed to think it was some kind of mental breakdown or psychotic break, not having any real reason to target me specifically other than the fact that I was alone. I no longer work there, but I can't tell you that for the years following that incident, I was on edge every single night. I work from home for a cybersecurity company, which isn't as exciting as it might sound. I have to be online overnight from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. scrolling through files full of code to see if anything is a possible threat. It's extremely boring, and when paired with the overnight shift, it makes for a struggle every night to stay awake. One night, just a few weeks ago, I was up at 2 a.m. working and feeling the weight of my eyes. I pushed through the sleepiness for a while, checking my phone over and over, hoping the time had somehow skipped forward at 2:40 a.m. Though I took a break and decided to order some food to get myself some fuel for the remaining 3 hours of my shift. I opened up Uber Eats and my only real option was Taco Bell. So I sent in an order and got up to get something to drink as I walked through the house with only the hallway light on. I woke up sometime and realized it was raining outside. I looked out the front window and was surprised at how hard the rain was coming down, given I had been so oblivious to it while working. My first thought was how I just ordered for delivery, and I felt really bad for basically making someone run through the rain for my own convenience. I checked my phone and saw that the order was already received, so I sat on the couch and waited for them to show up. After about 10 minutes, I was notified that they had picked up the order. So I watched the map on Uber Eats as the car made their way across town and eventually into my neighborhood. Once they were a minute away, I put my phone down and opened up the front door so we could make the exchange as quickly as possible. I stood at the open door, staring at the end of the road where they should have been coming from. But another 5 minutes went by without seeing any cars. I picked up my phone again and checked the map, but their car was still in my neighborhood. And when I zoomed in, I realized they were right around the corner, just before the turn onto my street. I looked outside again, but didn't see any lights from their car. My rightful reaction was that they probably had the wrong house or couldn't see the address numbers through the rain. So I tried calling them a few rings later, but they rejected it. I tried again, but had no luck. Unsure of what exactly was going on, I stayed at the door and waited. I want to say 5 more minutes went by before I tried to contact them again. I called and this time it rang for a while, but then they answered. I asked where they were and if they needed help finding my house, but as I listened for their response, all I heard from their side was the crackling sound of rain pouring down. After another few seconds, I hung up feeling really weird about that call. I checked the map one more time, and at first, it hadn't updated. But when it did, it showed them right outside my house. I checked the windows and saw nothing, but knowing they were walking around in the rain like this was giving me a really bad gut feeling. I closed the door and locked it, and I swear I only made it a few steps down the hallway before a loud knock shook the front door. I carefully looked through the peephole, and a man in a gray hoodie was pacing around on the porch. His head was on a swivel like he was checking for any onlookers as he waited anxiously for me to answer Uber Eats delivery. He yelled, but nowhere did I see a bag with my food. I stayed in place, not answering or making any sounds. The man got increasingly more hectic with his movements and called out several more times. Then he suddenly pressed himself up against the door, blocking my view as I heard a few dull scrapes on the wood before he quickly ran to the side of my house and disappeared in the rain. I called the cops, but their car was already gone, and from what I was told, they were using a scam account. A couple days went by with nothing else to report on, until I noticed a small scratch on my front door. It was an X, but it didn't look like it was made for me to see. It was more hidden, like a personal indicator for something. It still leaves me with an uneasy feeling in my gut, especially since he had some sort of sharp object in his hand as he waited for me to open the door. Part of me is still convinced that that won't be the last time I see him.